Much information exists on sustainability. The Kootenay-Columbia perspective, however, needs enhancing. This research project is called Sustainable Kootenay-Columbia, and opinion leaders speak out. Hi, I'm Reg Goldsberry, and I'm excited to talk to you today about sustainability. My research project has identified input from Kootenay-Columbia community leaders through a survey or interview, asking them about sustainability, asking what are the issues, what solutions do you know of, and are there potential collaborations and synergies that should be explored? The goal of this research was to uncover rural and small community struggles, opportunities for betterment, benefits of cooperative action within and between communities, and to shed light on the actionable activities for the region. By evaluating input from opinion leaders in the Kootenay-Columbia area as a greater community, the project is bringing into the discussion opportunities that can be explored that make a stronger case for better sustainable policy and infrastructure within current governance planning, ultimately bringing more benefit into our communities, creating a benchmark to understand the relevant issues at hand in our rural and small communities here in our regions. To achieve the 4 research objectives of this project, these communities and opinion leader respondents identified top concerns, priorities, and beneficial collaborations covering the 3 sustainability themes: social, environmental, and economic. This was done through an online survey or in-person telephone interview that was developed through secondary research for the project. 3 similar questions were asked in each sustainability theme, and the responses were categorized together. This was to limit anonymity throughout the project. The first question identified sustainability top concerns in a specific theme, and the second question asked for solutions. The third inquired about possible collaboration opportunities. These responses were then collated together and analyzed into discussions on each category, leading to the recommendations and priorities coming out of and following this research. The trends like housing, approach to governing, communication, addressing climate change, and collaborative action provide a strong case for the transition to better sustainable policy and infrastructure improvement in current Kootenay-Columbia planning and activity. The survey took place in the month of April 2022. Opinion leaders were prompted 3 times to complete the survey through email, and several were called with telephone reminders. 23 people responded to the online survey, 4 were interviewed by myself, the researcher, and 1 survey was printed and filled out and returned by email. The average time to fill out the survey online was 45 minutes and 35 seconds. That's astounding considering we thought it was going to be 20. Each personal interview was concluded within an hour's time. A few demographics: respondents ranged from the age 25 plus, 59% of the respondents were over the age of 55, and 61% of the respondents were male. Elected officials, mayors, and councillors and board directors made up almost 30% of the respondents. High-level bureaucrats, CEOs, CFOs, CAOs, and others were almost half of the respondents. Remaining respondents were equally distributed between businesses and media. Survey respondents lived and worked in a well-distributed geographic cross-section of the Kootenay-Columbia that followed population density in the region. Cranbrook and Nelson were the most represented by respondents with 26% and 15% respectively. 2 research projects helped guide this project. Robert Annis, Director of Rural Development Institute at Brandon University, and Lena E. Tuck from the Oregon State University. Robert Annis proposed a community collaboration model project that builds partnerships and strengthens community capacity through regional dialogue. Much of the collaboration and redundancy issues between rural communities of Ontario help guide the development of the survey and this research and focus the outcomes of top concerns, priorities, opportunities, and solutions in my research. Lena Etuck created a reference for rural community vitality by creating a baseline for the state to assess future policy and projects to see if rural vitality is being sustained or improved. My research project here has achieved the foundation of this research with a similar outcome, providing a blueprint of rural dynamics for the Kootenay-Columbia, giving perspective and direction to benchmarking rural and small community vitality in our region. Further research to achieve similar results to ETUC need to apply census data and qualify the sustainable supports throughout each of the communities in the research. This will be more effective if broken up into a smaller target market and individual sustainability themes. The information gap existing locally here is one that is simply not enough primary research in the Kootenay-Columbia, especially focused on connecting communities in a cooperative approach. The epistemological basis of the study uses a descriptive and explorative analysis of the secondary research and to juxtapose relevant literature, including academic journal articles, government documents, and other critical analysis on rural sustainability to the primary research. The primary research identified data through a survey interview of opinion leaders, elected officials, and others involved creating and tallying results to create the findings and recommendations we were talking about later in this presentation. The analysis goal in primary research design to obtain relevant data to establish a snapshot of where Kootenay-Columbia rural sustainability needs emerging from the COVID pandemic, with solutions and collaborations moving forward to address the vitality decline. This decline is seen through Kootenay-Columbia regions businesses shutting down and not being replaced, like the lumber mill in Canal Flats, or the closure of the successful flower shop in Caslow, where no one wants to buy the business. Critical infrastructure like the Kimberley water system needs upgrading to the tunes of tens of millions of dollars, and so much more. The target market, through sampling and recruitment, has the research population of this project at 275 elected officials, candidates, administrative opinion leaders in municipal, regional, provincial, and First Nation governments, Chamber of Commerce, destination marketing organizations, and other nonprofit groups in the Kootenay-Columbia. Editors and publishers of local media were also approached. Names have been left out to provide anonymity following strict ethics and research for the project. All individuals were contacted by a form email and asked to complete the survey. Additional respondents were recruited at the Cranbrook Tourism AGM. Now, on to the findings and results. Over 40 unique categories were identified and 499 intersecting mentions were identified from the 28 respondents. A lot of great content came out of the primary research in my project. This presentation is only going to focus on the top responses in each question category under each sustainability theme, and for the sake of time, leave out significant portions of quality information. I encourage you to read the full report available upon request. With 27 identified categories, there were 246 top concern mentions for social sustainability. Housing, with 13, was the biggest concern raised under social sustainability. Comments included skyrocketing housing prices, lack of housing inventory available, and exponential growth in communities with new construction not keeping up. The poverty homeless, with 4 mentioned subcategories, cited homelessness as problematic for vulnerable populations when combined with the housing concerns raised under economic sustainability, with 10 mentions. It is evident respondents believed affordable housing to be one of the greatest challenges facing Kootenay-Columbia right now. The second most mentioned concern in social sustainability was communication and approaches to government, with 12 mentions. Reactionary governments, poor communications, and poor collaboration were mentioned. Lack of political understanding of political needs and of community needs and priorities, and lack of inability to find meaningful solutions were raised. Disparities between local and provincial governments was mentioned, specifically the large amount of taxes collected here and the lack of access to provincial services. When combined with the communications and approaches to government subcategories, with 8 mentions here listed under economic sustainability, it is evident that the respondents had concerns about how Kootenay-Columbia is governed. Considering many in the survey sampled hailed from leadership positions in municipalities, this result is not surprising. Healthcare and mental health, with 9 and 8 mentions, together made the third and fourth most in social sustainability concerns, and together made up the largest area of concern for Kootenay-Columbia after housing. The urban versus rural disparity in healthcare was brought up in several contexts, including the lack of primary care, lack of service awareness, and lack of equitable service when compared to larger centers. The isolating effects of COVID-19 made up a substantial component of the mental health mentions, and the lack of mental health services was another big concern. For economic sustainability, insufficient and inefficient infrastructure 13 topped the list of economic concerns according to respondents. Essentially, infrastructure is old and growing populations are putting strains on existing systems. Funding competition with other communities and other regional priorities were cited as general infrastructure issues. Water, sewer, poor internet, and energy grid reliability were specific areas of most concern. According to respondents, poor internet is creating barriers for people who live and work here. Internet and cellular connectivity, reliability and availability, and tech companies not delivering the services advertised, like internet speeds, were discussed. Concerns in energy grid reliability were also raised for businesses and business development, as well as people working at home. An insightful comment pointed out that the densification, more urban sprawl, is putting greater pressure on local governments in terms of infrastructure and services, needing more water, sewer, public transport, schools, transportation, with 11 concerns under economic sustainability. Concerns cited a lack of safe and ineffective transportation services, public and private, with the region within communities and connecting communities. High costs for moving products and people into and within the region was mentioned as a challenge, including air travel costs. Our mountainous terrain, weather, and distances to be traveled create additional challenges for the transition to electric vehicles. Housing, again, is a clear economic sustainability concern as well. Respondents tied lack of affordable housing to attracting and retaining workers, stemming urban migration and attracting more businesses to the region. Other highly noted categories were mental health, COVID, agricultural food security, and more. For environmental and sustainability concerns, uh, climate change received the most mentions. Fire, smoke, air quality, floods, watershed management, and mudslides resulting from changing weather conditions dominated the discussion. Forest practices that exacerbated wildfires, and floods, and lack of preparedness and warning to battle and mitigate these battles are impending issues. Water and watershed security, with 11 mentions, and water pollution were the second largest environmental concerns listed. Many discussed how industries including agricultural, mining, logging are impacting and polluting water for domestic and agricultural use, as well as creating geohazards. Outside jurisdiction was cited as contributing to water issues, specifically provincial control over Crown land, unceded territory of the Indigenous people in our regions, and the hydroelectric industry, making watershed planning and water issues more complex. Energy sustainability, with 9 greenhouse gas emissions and natural resource extraction like lumber and mining, were categories that were highly mentioned. Social solutions had 28 identified categories and a total of 180 mentions. Overall, respondents had the most solutions in communications and approach to government with 14. As many respondents hailed from government, this finding is not surprising. A number suggested varying the funding schemes from the provincial government, including changing government formulas based on populations instead of geography, as well as allowing communities to opt out of urban taxation schemes, promoting rural and small community lens to provincial and federal policies, like other lenses like the LGBTQ plus community, women's, and indigenous were suggested. Better training for leaders and administrators received numerous mentions. Focus on changing circumstances, not band-aiding them, and listening to and meeting the actual needs of constituents were discussed. Suggested to attract the best candidates and employees was paying elected officials and government employees wages comparable to private businesses. Early and proactive stakeholders and community involvement and increased communication during government policy development was also raised to avoid last-minute frustrations. Housing, 13 mentions, had numerous suggestions, including incentivizing affordable housing development, worker housing, cooperative housing, senior housing, and more spaces for women and homeless shelters, all needing money though. Partnerships to advance affordable housing was raised, as well as the need for a champion or champions to take on projects to bring people together to make these projects happen. Challenge the streamlined building process and zoning, including allowing zoning for secondary houses on rural lots were raised. Healthcare, with 12 mentions, and mental health care were also key areas with many solutions. A massive joint healthcare recruitment program and a new provincial formula for paying, thus attracting doctors, were recognized as ways to improve shortage of workers. Bursaries, scholarships, student loan relief for those to choose who to work here was suggested. Tax and education and employment with 8 mentions, and First Nations were also mentioned as well. Too many to mention here. Economic sustainability solutions had communication and approach to governing again topped the list for sustainable solutions. Tax breaks, like those in Northern Canada, in the form of a rural and small community resident allowance, were suggested to recognize the additional costs of isolation, transportation, and cost of living in the Kootenay-Columbia region. Getting CMHC and lending institutions to recognize energy efficient cost savings in mortgage lending was another solution. Better enforcement of the rules, zoning of those communities without zoning, and proper taxing of corporations and developers to pay for infrastructure in their communities were also great suggestions to be explored. Growth strategies that promote centralizing housing and the downtown densification were raised. Better communication to inform citizens of existing programs and activities was deemed necessity, and including the use of social media and new technologies. Evolving the Columbia Basin Trust from an old economic model to one of social governance was suggested. Collaborations, including big conversations with businesses, industry, nonprofit, and other sectors, was another necessity outlined as a solution. Answers provided in business diversity and development suggest the need for long-term commitment to economic development and business diversification, and the need for leadership or committed champions to collaboratively work on long-term successful outcomes. Addressing administrative barriers were discussed, including changing bureaucratic attitudes to a can-do solution orientation, better training, and streamlining the red tape developers face. Developing downtown densities instead of urban sprawl was again suggested several times to use resources more efficiently, sewer, busing, schools, etc. Better access to financing and more support for developers meeting specific social goals like affordable housing or more sustainable buildings. So specific answers pointed to the need of leadership at the provincial and federal levels to help create wayfinding strategies for greater business diversification. First Nation involvement in land management strategy was suggested, including native plant nurseries, site restoration, impact mitigation, etc. Transportation and housing, both with 9 mentions, had infrastructure, had a great recommendations. I apologize in this presentation. I'm limited to discuss these matters more in depth. Frontline climate change with 8 mentions. Solutions were the top for environmental sustainability. Suggestions included interior health addressing the messaging on the health effects of poor air quality, investing more money in frontline resources and people for year-round wildfire mitigation and management, better supports for nonprofit organizations involved in local and regional conversations, better promoting the Smart Fire program. Energy sustainability had 5 respondents advising heat pumps incentives for housing sustainability upgrades through a municipal tax system and purchase sufficient equipment, solar panel heat pumps, and installation that homeowners and businesses can purchase at reduced costs due to volume purchasing. A robust charging network along with a regional electric vehicle ride share is another idea. Under natural resources, logging, mining were mentioned for better accountability and enforcement and stronger regulations, holding mining corporations accountable for permanent and long-term damage that continues well after the mines are closed, and creating more native tree farms and employing planting practices that ensure a healthy forest were also recommended. Collaborations and synergies results and discussion had 17 identified categories and 68 mentions in total. Substantial recommendations were submitted under collaborative approach to communication and governments with 19. To name a few, respondents pointed out how duplications in small governments across the Kootenay geography are diluted the financial pot and creating fiefdoms that take precedent over cooperative action. There remains such much competitiveness around who gets funding and credit for which one respondents advised need replacing with what is best for the community service attitude. Cutting bureaucracy and setting up administrators to think outside the box was also indicated. Sharing administrative services was suggested, and different communities taking on more substantial roles in a specific area and ceding some responsibility to other communities. Regional teams or task forces leading areas of governments in the Kootenay-Columbia was recommended. The need for an overarching regional group, an umbrella networking group to facilitate better communication so various organizations and municipalities can work together was recommended. Even having regular community leader meetings to get community and opinion leaders on the same page is something that needs to happen. A community navigator, centralized social development manager for the region, chambers working together and closely connecting their business communities, motivating our federal members of parliament to bring people together for the greater good of the region was also put forward, albeit with not much confidence from this respondent. Fragmentation of marketing and community calendar was indicated as problematic and could be solved by pooling marketing dollars for a regional marketing program was another suggestion. Recreation and culture, recommending more feel-good initiatives to bring the community together to help with mental health was suggested. Collaborative opportunities in housing and volunteerism got mentions, and this is only communication approach to governments top the responses for the economic collaboration and synergies. Working together as a super community was again suggested where municipalities and regional districts work together to address key issues. The Cranbrook-Kimberley Development Initiative, the Economic Action Pact from the RDCK, and the the Creston Valley Economic Action Partnership were named as good examples of communities working together. We need more of this. When discussing business diversity development, a need for regional collaboration between community economic development officers and between chambers of commerce was recommended. Another indicated marketing fragmentation was problematic and duplication of activities rampant. Quote, we don't need more map guides from another tourism group, end quote. Another mentioned how the many different marketing voices and messaging are being lost. Working together for a consistent and financially well-supported marketing message for the entire region was advocated so that our tourism message stands out. There is substantial information that this presentation is only touching the surface of, and I encourage you to read the final report. Environmental sustainability and collaboration had climate change mentions, where groups for potential and further collaborations, including the West Kootenay Eco Society, the Climate Hub, Wild Site, Friends of Kootenay Lake, and Kootenay Preservation Program. When discussing water and collaborating on water, many of these conservation groups were mentioned. Again, the need to work together. The comment that the Kootenay Lake Partnership successfully unifies focus, guiding development and building positive relationships across numerous stakeholders outline principles for collaborative work. We should follow these. The RDCK noted that they're hoping to expand value conversations, working and local benefits, working together for greater synergies and purchasing power, and lobbying abilities were mentioned. A need for better education and public engagement on forestry and local governments initiatives addressing wildfire threat and mitigation was also noted. A climate hub was mentioned as a science-based resource group advocating energy-efficient housing, construction, and electrification, helping the grid. Capitalizing on our solar power in Kimberley and Cranbrook to capitalize on greater sun exposure was suggested. Joint efforts to purchase items like heat pumps to bring down costs was again mentioned. Collaborations to better educate residents on energy sustainability and programs was advised. There is a lot of great information that's come out of this study. The snapshot of leadership perspectives in the Kootenay-Columbia provided by this study clearly indicates key activities can be undertaken in the region. Awareness and communication, collaboration, financing, and leadership are crucial components to successfully implementing the many ideas and solutions raised by the respondents. The key ingredients being more collaboration and money. A lesson emerging from this research project is that a progressive community leader and stakeholder organizations need to better connect and engage in better community contact and regional interaction when developing policy and infrastructure development. Collaborations are essential to the rural culture interwoven between and within communities. Regular regional leadership conferences with limited entry barriers is one of the many simple ideas that come from this research that could start pointing to continue to grow rural and small community vitality conversations. Based on the competitive political culture that has existed for many years, the transition to inclusion may be difficult. Ongoing discussions within and between communities is essential to encourage the conversation of sustainability, strategic planning and action raised in this research, and to eliminate unnecessary duplications of effort that we see in marketing. Creative strategies will need to be broached, and limited resources within each community and the geological inequalities that exist. Working together, communities will maximize the impact of benefit, and a can-do solutions that encourages communal and regional inclusion will be beneficial. Financing to achieve better collaborative sustainability remains an obstacle. Further research into actionable strategies with a focus on physical resources and funding for sustainable initiatives is required. The work required to achieve better sustainability in the Kootenay-Columbia regions is substantial, and the motivation to tackle the issue needs enhancing and political agendas need to be set aside. Success of sustainable action is rooted in a providing measure benchmarks. Benchmarks for further Kootenay-Columbia research can follow ETUC's model and create a quantitative index of vitality looking at various operational aspects of sustainable activities, including census data and dollar amounts contributed to sustainability in each community. A broad scope of rural sustainability that this research project undertook challenged the feasibility of the project. A research project could be developed out of each social, environmental, and economic sustainability theme to further explore greater specifics in each category. And this is where the research should advance. Greater sampling and community representation is required for a more comprehensive picture. The opportunity exists to engage many others and local groups. Rural and small communities in the Kootenay-Columbia face unique challenges to sustain and grow vitality when compared to more urban geographic locations. The information gleaned from this study contributes to a regionalized perspective of social, economic, and environmental concerns, solutions, and collaborative synergies, adding to the limited general information available on sustainability for the Kootenay-Columbia. The research here provides a snapshot of the regional's leadership priorities as our region emerges from COVID-19 pandemic and marches forward during a time of economic, social, and environmental uncertainty. This research project highlights the importance of identifying gaps in the vitality research in Kootenay-Columbia and has identified solutions readily available to the stakeholder community. Thank you for your time today.